Nkiru was the kind of woman people described with respect even when she wasn't present. In the compound, her name carried the weight of quiet discipline, the type that didn't need noise to announce itself. She woke early not because life was easy, but because she believed order was a form of prayer. Her home reflected that belief. Curtains always aligned, cushions arranged with intention, the faint scent of disinfectant and cooking spices lingering like proof of care. Kunal, her husband, benefited from this order without understanding it. To him, the peace in the house was normal, automatic, like breathing. He never stopped to ask how it was maintained, or who paid the emotional price for it. That morning, Nkiru moved around the house calmly, tying her wrapper, adjusting her earrings, checking her mental shopping list like a seasoned general preparing for battle at the market. Her face was relaxed, her heart unguarded, because trust had never failed her before. She spoke to Kunal softly as she prepared to leave, teasing him about how he would probably sleep the whole time she was gone. Kunal laughed a little too quickly, nodding as if agreement was safer than conversation. Nkiru didn't notice the speed of his smile or the way his eyes avoided hers for half a second too long. She believed in her marriage the way some people believed in sunrise. It had never failed to show up. So why doubt it now? Outside, the compound was already alive. Children ran barefoot, a radio argued loudly about football, and one woman swept her side of the corridor like she was angry with dust itself. Nkiru greeted everyone easily, exchanging jokes and complaints about food prices, her laughter light and unburdened. To the world, she looked exactly like what she was believed to be, a woman secure in her home. As she walked out of the compound, handbag swinging gently at her side, fate watched quietly. The kind of fate that didn't rush, didn't warn, didn't interrupt. Kunal stood at the doorway, watching her go, his smile fixed, his shoulders stiff. The moment her footsteps faded, something invisible shifted in the air, like a curtain falling after a performance. Kunal's face changed, not dramatically, but decisively. He locked the door with intention, checked the windows, and released a breath that sounded like freedom to him, but would later sound like foolishness to everyone else. In that moment, he believed he was smart. He believed he was careful. He believed nothing would happen. And that belief was the most dangerous thing he owned. The house fell into a strange quiet after Nkiru left, not the peaceful quiet of rest, but the tense stillness of anticipation. Kunal moved around like a man waiting for a secret reward, touching things without seeing them, pacing as if the tiles beneath his feet were counting time. He checked his phone repeatedly, wiping his palms on his trousers whenever it buzzed, his heartbeat responding faster than his thoughts. Kunal did not fear wrongdoing. He feared exposure. In his mind, betrayal was not the crime. Noise was. He believed sins were manageable as long as they were silent, as long as the compound aunties didn't gather, as long as his name remained clean in people's mouths. That was the logic guiding him as he typed a short message, one he had typed before with disturbing confidence. She's gone. The message carried more weight than he realized. It was not just an invitation. It was a signature beneath his own disgrace. Saad arrived cautiously, her knock soft and deliberate, like someone aware she shouldn't be there. When Kunal opened the door, he pulled her inside quickly, scanning the corridor before locking it again. Saada's usual confidence, the one she wore to church meetings and women's gatherings, was absent. Here, she looked smaller, nervous, adjusting her scarf repeatedly as if it could hide her conscience. She whispered questions almost immediately, asking where Nkiru had gone, how long she would be away, whether Kunal was sure. Kunal laughed her worries away, with a careless confidence that bordered on arrogance. He told her Nkiru took hours in the market, that she loved bargaining like sport, that there was no danger. His tone suggested ownership of time, of secrecy, of his wife's absence. Saad tried to smile, but fear lingered behind her eyes, refusing to be dismissed. As they moved deeper into the house, Kunal grew bolder. He stopped checking the curtains. He stopped listening for footsteps. His laughter grew louder, more relaxed, forgetting that daylight is not forgiving. Saad, however, flinched at every sound, the closing of a gate, the shout of a neighbor, the sudden laughter outside. At one point, a voice called Nkiru's name casually in the compound, and both of them froze like children caught stealing meat. Connell waved it off, joking again, but the tension had already settled like dust that refused to be swept away. Outside, life continued normally. Inside, a lie stretched itself comfortably across another woman's home, unaware that lies, when given space, grow heavy enough to collapse the floor beneath them. Saad was not just any neighbor. She was known, respected, and admired, especially in church. She led women's meetings with authority, quoted scripture effortlessly, and prayed with the kind of confidence that made people believe heaven was listening closely. When women had marital problems, Saad was often called. When there were church programs, Saada's voice was always heard. She carried herself like someone who had moral ground to stand on, someone whose life supported her words. That reputation followed her everywhere, including into Connell's house, where it now sat awkwardly on her shoulders like clothing borrowed for the wrong occasion. Sitting on Kira's couch, Saad felt the discomfort of contradiction pressing against her chest. The house did not feel neutral. It felt claimed by love, by effort, by a woman who believed in peace. Her husband, Femi, was a steady man, quiet, hard-working, and trusting in the way that sometimes leaves people exposed. Saad had learned to excuse her actions with familiar lies: loneliness, lack of attention, unmet needs. She told herself she deserved happiness, even if it came in the wrong place. Yet, sitting there, she couldn't ignore the irony. The same mouth that encouraged women to avoid temptation had whispered agreement to Connell's message. The same hands that laid on heads in prayer now trembled in fear of discovery. She tried to calm herself by talking about church activities, about market prices, about nothing important, words spilling out like distractions from guilt. Connell listened with only half attention, his mind focused on the thrill of secrecy rather than the weight of consequence. Connell treated Saad like a temporary escape, not a responsibility. To him, this was excitement, not commitment. He didn't think about Femi. He didn't think about church. He didn't think about what it meant to turn his wife's trust into opportunity. He enjoyed the danger, the whispered voices, the stolen time, the belief that he was smarter than fate. He had no idea that fate did not need intelligence to win. It only needed patience. And somewhere outside, patience was already moving quietly toward his front door. Every corner of the house carried Nkiru's presence, the careful arrangement of furniture, the faint scent of cleanliness, the sense of order that made the space feel safe. Saad noticed it all, and instead of stopping her, it unsettled her. She shifted uncomfortably, adjusting her wrapper, glancing around as if the walls themselves were watching. Connell, on the other hand, moved freely, pouring drinks into cups his wife favored, sitting comfortably where Nkiru often sat. He behaved like ownership excused everything. Saad asked again if he was certain Nkiru wouldn't return soon, and Connell dismissed the concern with laughter, calling her worries unnecessary. To him, Nkiru's trust was predictable, manageable. He underestimated it the way careless people underestimate calm waters. Time passed strangely, too slow to feel safe, too fast to feel in control. Their laughter rose and fell, occasionally interrupted by sudden silence, whenever a sound outside reminded them the world was close. Saada's fear deepened, but she didn't leave. Fear rarely stops people once desire has crossed the line. She whispered small prayers under her breath, asking for protection without repentance, hoping God would ignore context. Connell grew increasingly relaxed, forgetting to check the curtains, forgetting caution. His confidence expanded, as though nothing could interrupt the borrowed time they were spending in someone else's life. Meanwhile, Nkiru moved through the market with focus and humor, bargaining fiercely and joking about inflation like everyone else. Her mind was on groceries, not betrayal. She thought of soup ingredients, of meals to prepare, of returning home satisfied. But as she reached into her handbag to check her phone, her fingers found nothing. She searched again, frowning. The realization came quickly. She had left her phone behind. She sighed, half annoyed, half amused, and turned back toward home. It felt like a small inconvenience. It was not. Nkiru entered the compound briskly, already planning to grab her phone and leave again before anyone noticed. She greeted one neighbor absently, her thoughts focused on time. But as she approached her door, something slowed her steps. It wasn't sound at first, it was instinct. The kind that makes you pause even when logic says continue. Then she heard it, laughter. Not Connell's usual laughter. Not television laughter. This was close, shared, intimate. A woman's voice followed, familiar enough to make Nkiru's chest tighten painfully. Her hand stilled on the door handle. Her breathing slowed. The corridor felt suddenly smaller, heavier. She unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. The scene froze instantly. Connell's face drained of color. Saad stiffened, her eyes wide, mouth opening without sound. No one spoke. The silence was so thick it felt deliberate, punishing. Nkiru's gaze moved between them slowly, taking in everything without blinking. She did not scream. She did not cry. That calm terrified them more than any noise could have. Connell stepped forward instinctively, hands raised, words tumbling out in panic. Saad dropped her head, tears already flowing, her body trembling like something exposed to cold. They began to beg almost immediately. Connell pleaded for silence, for mercy, for his reputation. Saad begged for discretion, for understanding, for protection of her church image. Promises spilled out, empty, desperate, loud in their fear. Nkiru listened without interruption, her face unreadable. When they finished, she reached for her phone calmly. Connell called her name in terror. Saad sobbed harder, but Nkiru dialed anyway. The call connected, and in that moment, they both understood that silence was no longer an option, and the consequences they feared had already begun. The call connected, and the world outside their living room began to shift, even though the compound was still doing compound things. Sweeping, shouting at children, arguing about whose turn it was to fetch water, and laughing like nothing was wrong. Nkiru's voice on the phone was steady, almost frighteningly calm, like a woman describing the weather and not the collapse of her life. She didn't use insults. She didn't dramatize. She simply said what happened and where she was, and asked the elders and close family to come. When she ended the call, Connell looked at her like a man watching his own coffin being built in real time. His lips trembled. His eyes darted to the door, then back to her face, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Saad sat rigid, wrapper clutched tightly, tears dropping silently at first, those early tears that come before the real crying starts, when shame hasn't fully arrived yet but is already knocking. Nkiru picked up her phone as if it was just an object she came to collect, and that calmness, the refusal to perform pain for them, was what made their begging turn into panic. Connell tried again, switching strategies the way weak people switch excuses. He promised change with the desperation of a man promising heaven while falling. He said it was a mistake. He said it meant nothing. He said Saad came to talk. Then he realized Nkiru's eyes were not buying anything, and he began to plead properly, voice low, hands shaking, pride thrown away like an empty sachet of water. Please, Nkiru, please. Don't do this. Don't call anybody. Let's talk. Let's settle it. His fear wasn't even love. It was reputation. His name in the mouths of the compound aunties, his job, his standing with friends, the polite respect he enjoyed outside. Saad also tried, her voice cracking. My sister, I beg. I beg you, don't shout. Don't raise alarm. People will hear. I'm a women leader in church. Please. That last sentence landed in the room like a slap. Women leader. Church. Title. The same title that gave her a front seat to other people's marital troubles had now become the rope tightening around her own neck. Nkiru didn't argue with them. She didn't insult them. She simply moved. She took one slow step toward the door, then another, like someone leaving a room where the air had turned poisonous. Connell rushed ahead of her slightly, blocking the path, not aggressively, not with threats, but with the frantic energy of someone trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. He lowered his voice. Nkiru, please, just listen. Even if you're angry, think of how people will talk. Think of your own name too. It was almost funny in the most bitter way, Connell trying to protect Nkiru's name when he had just dragged it through the mud of betrayal. Nkiru looked at him, and the look alone made him step aside. Her eyes carried something stronger than anger, finality. She walked out into the corridor and stood there briefly, breathing, her face composed as if she was balancing a pot on her head, steady, careful, refusing to fall. And inside, Connell and Sod were left together with the sound of their own heartbeat, realizing that the world they feared was now on its way. The first people arrived faster than Connell expected, because in Nigeria, elders move like thunder when family matters become public. 1 minute the compound was normal. The next it began to feel like a gathering. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. Voices called greetings that were polite but curious. An auntie from the next flat paused sweeping and leaned slightly toward the corridor, pretending she wasn't listening. Someone whispered, "What happened?" Someone else replied, "I don't know, but Nkiru called people." That statement alone was enough to shake Connell's bones. Nkiru wasn't known for trouble. If Nkiru called elders, then something had happened that couldn't be covered with perfume and smiles. She stood near the entrance, greeting those who came with a calm respect that made the situation even more terrifying for the guilty ones inside. Her composure was the announcement. Her quietness was the siren. By the time more relatives arrived, the compound had changed completely, like a normal day suddenly turning into a trial. Inside the house, Connell paced like a trapped animal. He peeped through the curtain and saw faces gathering, neighbors, elders, a few family members. He felt the heat rise from his chest to his ears, that burning shame that arrives before punishment. His mouth went dry. His knees felt weak. Sod sat on the edge of the couch like she was perched on the edge of disaster, eyes swollen, lips trembling. She kept whispering, "God forbid. God forbid," as if repeating it could reverse time. Connell snapped at her softly, not in anger, but in pure fear. "Stop saying God forbid. God is not forbidding anything today." Then he regretted it immediately, because even his own voice sounded like confession. Sod covered her face with her scarf and began to cry properly now, the kind of crying that makes your shoulders shake, the kind that says, "I have destroyed myself. They will remove me from church," she whispered like it was a death sentence. "Women fellowship will hear. My husband will hear. I will be disgraced." Connell didn't comfort her. He couldn't even comfort himself. All he could think of was one thing: they must not enter this house. Because if they entered, the lie would be dragged into daylight, and daylight doesn't negotiate. But the house was not theirs to control anymore. A knock came, firm, deliberate, the kind of knock that doesn't ask permission. Connell froze. Another knock followed, heavier. Someone called his name. "Connell, open this door." His heart hammered, so loudly he wondered if people outside could hear it. He looked at Sod, and for a second both of them shared the same thought. If the ground could open and swallow us, we would enter willingly. Sod whispered, "I wish I was dead." Not as romance, not as drama, just the raw, terrified statement of someone who wanted to vanish. Connell swallowed hard, sweat forming at his temples. He moved toward the door, slowly, like a man walking to his own sentencing. He placed his hand on the handle, then pulled it back, as if the metal was hot. Outside, voices murmured. The waiting had begun. And waiting, in Nigerian compounds, is never quiet. It is filled with eyes. Nkiru's relatives and the elders settled into positions outside that made it clear. Nobody was leaving until the truth came out. Some stood by the corridor railings, arms crossed. Some sat on plastic chairs brought out by a neighbor, because in Nigeria, once drama starts, chairs appear like magic. One auntie even carried her own stool from inside her room, not pretending anymore, sitting down like she had paid for tickets. Nkiru did not address the crowd with long explanations. She simply said, respectfully, "Please, wait. I called you because I needed witnesses." Witnesses. The word alone cut through Connell's hope like knife through soft bread. Witnesses meant this would not be settled with sweet mouth. Witnesses meant evidence. Witnesses meant shame would have official eyes. Connell's throat tightened as he heard it through the door. Sada's crying became silent again, replaced by stiff terror. She wiped her face repeatedly, as if clean cheeks could undo dirty actions. Inside, Connell turned to Saad with trembling hands. "We need to talk to her," he whispered. "We need to beg her again." It was almost funny. The same man who had been confident minutes earlier was now reduced to a frightened boy. Saad nodded, breathing fast. Connell opened the door just a little and spoke softly to Nkiru, trying to pull her aside like a thief bargaining quietly. "Nkiru, please. Let's talk inside." Nkiru looked at him and didn't move. Her face was calm but closed, like a gate that had decided it would not open again. Connell stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to do this. Whatever you want, we will do. Please don't disgrace me. Disgrace me. Not I hurt you. Not I betrayed you. Disgrace me." Saad joined, her voice shaking. "My sister, I beg you. Please, I'm a leader in church. If this comes out, I am finished." The irony was so heavy it could make even an elder sigh. Leader in church, but follower in sin. Nkiru listened, then replied softly, "You should have remembered your church title before entering my house." Connell's body jerked as if the sentence slapped him. He tried again, switching to emotional manipulation. "Think about what people will say about you too. They will talk. You know Lagos." Nkiru nodded slowly. "Let them talk," she said. "Today, they will talk about truth." Connell's eyes widened in horror because he realized she wasn't afraid of gossip. That was his biggest weapon, fear of public opinion, and it had failed. The crowd outside continued waiting, murmuring, watching. Connell and Saad stayed trapped between two disasters. Outside were witnesses ready to judge, and inside was their guilt pressing like heat. They couldn't run. They couldn't fight. They couldn't rewrite the story. For the first time, they felt what betrayal often ignores until it's too late. The victim also has power. And Nkiru's power was not screaming. It was exposure. When the senior elder arrived, an older man whose voice carried authority that didn't need volume, the compound became even quieter. He greeted Nkiru, asked her calmly what happened, and she answered in the same steady tone, with the same terrifying control. She didn't insult anyone. She simply described what she saw, who she saw, and where she saw them. Her words were plain, but plain truth cuts deeper than decorated lies. The elder sighed once, slowly, not because he was surprised, but because disappointment has its own sound. Then he asked, "Where are they?" Nkiru pointed to the door. The elder nodded. "Open it," he said, and that was not a request. Connell heard it and nearly collapsed. His knees bent slightly as if his body wanted to surrender before the door did. Saad covered her face again, whispering prayers that sounded like panic. Connell's fingers shook as he reached for the handle. He turned it, and the door opened wider this time, exposing them to daylight and to eyes. The moment Connell stepped out, the air outside felt heavier than inside. Faces looked at him with a mixture of shock and disgust, especially the women, because women recognize betrayal the way they recognize smoke. Saad followed behind him slowly, head bowed, eyes swollen, her body moving like someone walking to punishment. And then someone in the crowd whispered, not loudly, but clearly enough, "Is that not Saad, the women leader?" Another voice replied, "Jesus." It was that simple word, Jesus, that carried the full weight of scandal. No insult was needed. The title became her shame. Sada's knees weakened. She held her wrapper tighter, as if modesty could protect her now. Connell tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. He greeted the elders, voice cracking. He attempted to smile, impossible. His fear was now visible, and in Nigeria, when your fear is visible, people know you are guilty. The elder raised a hand, not in threat, but in authority, and told everyone to be calm. Then he turned to Connell and asked the question that destroys liars. "Did you do it?" Connell hesitated. That hesitation was confession. Sada's sob escaped her chest like it couldn't be held back anymore. Connell tried to explain, but his explanation sounded like dust. He blamed temptation. He blamed weakness. He tried to minimize it. Nkiru stood quietly, letting him talk himself into deeper shame. The elder listened, then said, "So you disgraced your wife inside her own home." Connell's face tightened. He looked around at the watching neighbors and felt his reputation slipping like sand through fingers. Saad realized the same thing. Her church image was not just damaged, it was dead. And in that moment, both of them understood that the consequences they feared were not coming. They had arrived. The compound was no longer just a compound. It was now a witness. By evening, what started as a private betrayal had become a public reckoning, and the compound had fully transformed into a place of judgment. More people arrived not because they were invited, but because news travels faster than Okada. Someone's cousin came to greet. A neighbor's friend stopped by to check something. Even the man who sold recharge cards near the junction suddenly had a reason to pass through. Lagos people don't like missing fresh gist. It's like refusing free food. Yet, despite the crowd, the atmosphere wasn't playful. It was tense, heavy, loaded with moral shock. This wasn't just cheating. It was cheating with a neighbor's wife, a church leader, inside the wife's home. That combination was like mixing pepper, fuel, and shame. Everyone knew the story would not end gently. Nkiru remained composed, speaking only when necessary. Her calmness turning her into something almost sacred in the eyes of women watching. A woman who refused to beg for respect. Kunnel sat on a chair outside, sweat on his forehead even though the sun was already softening. He could barely look up. Every time someone whispered, he imagined his name being dragged. Every time someone cleared their throat, he imagined his workplace hearing. He tried to plead privately with Nkiru again, but the elders blocked him with their presence, like human walls. The elder women looked at him with disgust that did not require words. Some shook their heads slowly, the way Nigerian women do when disappointment has matured. Saad remained standing slightly behind, refusing to lift her head. She felt like every eye was a camera, recording her shame. She imagined the church, how women would whisper during service, how her seat would suddenly feel too hot, how people would avoid her handshakes. She imagined being removed from leadership, not with anger, but with cold silence. That thought made her stomach twist like bitter leaf. And the worst part for both of them was the waiting. People kept asking, "Where is the other husband? Has her husband heard? When will they call him?" Each question was a nail. Kunnel's mind raced, calculating damage, imagining his phone ringing with workplace calls, imagining his boss's face, imagining friends laughing. He wished for an accident, for a distraction, for anything to scatter the crowd. Saad wished she could disappear into thin air, or wake up and realize it was a nightmare. But reality was stubborn. Reality sat in that compound like an elder with folded arms, refusing to leave until truth had finished speaking. And as the sky dimmed, the crowd did not reduce. Instead, the silence grew more serious, because everyone sensed the next part of the story was coming, and when it arrived, it would not be kind. When the elder asked for phones, the compound went completely still. It wasn't a dramatic demand, but it carried finality, the kind that told everyone lies were about to lose their hiding place. Kunnel's phone felt suddenly heavy in his hand, like it had grown weight from guilt alone. He hesitated, fingers tightening around it, until the elder cleared his throat softly. That small sound was enough. Kunnel handed it over with the reluctant obedience of a man surrendering evidence against himself. Sada's phone followed, her hands shaking so badly another woman had to take it from her gently. Nkiru stood slightly aside, not triumphant, not excited, just present. The elders moved with care, scrolling slowly, deliberately, not rushing like gossipers, but reading like judges. Each swipe felt longer than the last. Faces hardened. Murmurs started and stopped. Someone sighed deeply. Someone else muttered, "Kai." The messages were read aloud, not all, but enough. Dates. Familiar endearments. Plans made confidently inside another woman's marriage. The casualness of betrayal shocked even those who had suspected something. Kunnel's excuses collapsed immediately, because messages don't stutter the way guilty mouths do. Sada's church title was mentioned again, this time without sarcasm, just disbelief. A woman leader counseling others, yet hiding in another woman's home like a thief in daylight. Saad broke down completely then, her crying no longer controlled, no longer dignified. It was raw, embarrassing, the kind of crying that strips a person of status. Cunnel tried to speak, but every attempt sounded like noise. The evidence spoke better than he ever could. Nkiru watched it all, without gloating. Her pain was not loud, but it was deep. Seeing the messages confirmed what her heart already knew, that this was not a moment of weakness, but a pattern of disrespect. The elders closed the phones and handed them back, disappointment etched into their faces. One elder shook his head slowly and said, "So this is how you repay peace." Cunnel lowered his head, his reputation unraveling thread by thread in front of everyone. Saad felt something heavier than shame settle on her chest, exposure. Not just of her actions, but of a lie she had lived publicly. And in that moment, both of them understood that the worst damage was not yet done. The truth had only finished speaking. Consequences were about to start listening. The call to Sada's husband was made without ceremony. No insults. No shouting. Just information. When Femi arrived, he didn't rush. He walked into the compound calmly, greeted the elders respectfully, and listened. That calmness frightened Saad more than anger ever could. She stood frozen, unable to lift her eyes as her husband's presence filled the space. The elders explained briefly, carefully, as if handling something fragile. Femi's face didn't change much at first. He nodded slowly, absorbing each word like a man counting losses quietly. Then the messages were mentioned. The location. The house. Nkiru's house. That was when his shoulders dropped slightly, like something inside him finally accepted the weight. Femi didn't shout. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't insult anyone. He simply turned to Saad and asked one question in a low, steady voice. "Is it true?" Sada's mouth opened, but nothing came out except tears. Her silence answered him more clearly than words. Femi closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and nodded once. That nod carried disappointment, grief, and finality all at once. He thanked the elders quietly and apologized to Nkiru, not for his wife's actions, but for the pain caused inside her home. That apology, coming from the wrong person, cut deeper than insults would have. Saad collapsed onto a chair, sobbing, the full weight of her actions finally landing. Her marriage didn't explode. It cracked silently, which was somehow worse. Cunnel watched the scene with growing dread. Seeing another man's marriage collapse because of his actions stripped away his last excuse. This was no longer just his home in trouble. It was a chain reaction. The elders spoke softly to Femi, advising space, advising reflection. Femi nodded again and said very little before leaving, his back straight, his silence heavy. Saad realized then that forgiveness would not come easily, if at all. The respect she once enjoyed had evaporated in a single afternoon. And as Femi walked away, Saad felt the terrifying truth settle in her bones. Titles don't protect you from consequences. They only make the fall louder. Cunnel tried one last time to save what little he thought could still be salvaged. As the crowd thinned slightly and elders began discussing next steps, he leaned toward Nkiru, lowering his voice again like secrecy could still help him. He spoke about mistakes, about pressure, about temptation, words that sounded rehearsed and empty. He tried to present himself as a man who slipped, not a man who planned. He suggested counseling. He suggested time. He even suggested that public exposure would hurt everyone equally, as if shared pain somehow excused betrayal. Nkiru listened, expression unreadable, and then shook her head slowly. "You are still thinking about control," she said quietly. "This is not about control anymore." That sentence ended his argument better than shouting ever could. Outside that small exchange, the community was already forming its own conclusions. Neighbors who once greeted Cunnel warmly now avoided his eyes. Some women looked at him with open disgust. Others looked at Nkiru with sympathy and admiration. The narrative was no longer his to shape. In Nigerian compounds, stories settle quickly, and this one had settled firmly on the side of truth. Cunnel felt it slipping, the respect, the casual jokes, the friendly nods. He realized too late that reputation is not owned. It is borrowed from community trust. And once returned damaged, it is rarely lent again. Saad sat quietly, no longer crying loudly, just staring into nothing. Her mind raced ahead to church, the whispers, the removal from leadership, the polite smiles that would turn cold. Connell noticed how she no longer clung to him for comfort, and for the first time it occurred to him that their secret had never been strong. It had only been hidden. Now that it was visible, it had no spine. Connell's fear grew heavier as he imagined work, imagined colleagues, imagined questions he couldn't answer. He had tried to manage the story and failed. The story was now managing him. The following days confirmed what Connell feared most. The compound changed its tone toward him completely. Greetings became short or disappeared entirely. Conversations stopped when he approached. Children who once ran to him now stayed close to their mothers. It wasn't dramatic rejection, it was colder than that. Indifference. In Nigerian culture, that kind of social withdrawal speaks louder than insults. Nkiru, on the other hand, received quiet support. Food arrived at her door without announcement. Women stopped by just to greet. Elders checked on her, not with pity, but with respect. Her decision to expose truth rather than bury it earned her a kind of standing she had never asked for. Saad faced her own version of exile. Church messages stopped coming. A polite but firm call informed her she should step down from leadership for now. No accusations were shouted, but everyone knew. The silence was deliberate. She attended one service after the incident and felt every glance like heat on her skin. She did not return the following week. Shame followed her everywhere, not because people insulted her, but because they remembered who she claimed to be. Her title now preceded her name like a warning. Connell tried to act normal, but normal had rejected him. Friends distanced themselves. Phone calls went unanswered. The social armor he relied on had dissolved. He realized that betrayal doesn't just damage marriages, it rearranges communities. People began to see him clearly, and clarity is cruel to those who rely on confusion to survive. The isolation settled slowly, day by day, and with it came regret that no apology could undo. The call from Connell's workplace came sooner than expected. It wasn't aggressive. It was formal, professional, and devastating. He was asked to explain certain concerns that had reached management. Connell's heart sank as he realized the story had traveled beyond the compound. In Nigeria, personal scandals have a way of following you into offices, especially when they involve public disgrace. He dressed carefully for the meeting, as if appearance could protect him, but confidence abandoned him the moment he stepped inside. The questions were measured. His answers were weak. By the end of the meeting, he was placed on suspension pending review. No shouting. No insults. Just consequences. Connell walked out of the office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the waiting was over, heavier because reality had finally landed. He imagined explaining it to people. He imagined bills. He imagined sitting alone in the house that once felt like home. Meanwhile, Nkiru began making quiet plans for herself. Not revenge plans. Survival plans. Dignity plans. She spoke to family, considered separation, and took comfort in the fact that she did not need to shout to be strong. Her calm had carried her this far. It would carry her further. By the time night fell, Connell sat alone, the silence no longer protective but accusing. His reputation was fractured. His job uncertain. His marriage slipping away. Sada's life was unraveling in parallel. Her identity stripped bare. And somewhere in the quiet, a truth settled firmly between them. Consequences do not arrive loudly. They arrive steadily, and once they begin, they do not ask permission to continue. Sada's removal from the neighborhood did not happen with noise or shouting. It happened with quiet decisions that cut deeper than insults. Her family arrived one afternoon, faces tight with disappointment, voices low and controlled. They did not argue with elders. They did not defend her actions. They listened, nodded, and spoke among themselves in the restrained tones of people cleaning a mess they never created. Saad stood aside, eyes downcast, the once confident church leader now reduced to a woman waiting for instructions. When they told her she would leave the compound immediately, there was no protest. Her strength had evaporated. She packed slowly, hands trembling, folding clothes without care, each item a reminder that comfort does not survive disgrace. Neighbors watched from doorways without comment. No one needed to say anything. The message was clear. As she stepped out with her bags, Saad felt the weight of eyes, not angry, not mocking, just aware. Awareness is heavy. She avoided looking at Nkiru, not because of hatred, but because guilt cannot meet dignity without collapsing. Her family ushered her into a waiting car, and the door closed with a soft final sound that felt louder than a slap. In that moment, Saad understood that consequences don't always scream. Sometimes they escort you quietly away from the life you once controlled. Her church title, her social respect, her sense of belonging, all of it stayed behind in that compound, scattered like items forgotten during a rushed move. Kunal watched from a distance, chest tight, realizing too late that his actions had destroyed more than one home. Saada's departure sealed the reality that this was not a misunderstanding to be settled privately. It was an ending. And endings, once announced publicly, rarely reverse themselves. The compound exhaled after the car drove away, as if relief itself had waited for her exit. The conversation about Nkiru's marriage was short and decisive. Elders spoke gently, not because the offense was small, but because shouting was unnecessary. Nkiru listened respectfully, thanked them, and then stated her choice clearly. There would be no reconciliation. No counseling period. No performance of forgiveness for public comfort. Her words were calm, but they carried the weight of a door closing. Kunal tried to interrupt, tried to bargain, tried to remind her of history and shared memories. Nkiru stopped him with a raised hand, not aggressively, just firmly. History is not permission, she said quietly. That sentence settled the matter. Arrangements followed quickly. Nkiru gathered her personal belongings with efficiency, refusing help that would turn her departure into drama. Women in the compound assisted silently, their actions supportive, their faces serious. Kunal stood aside, watching the house empty of the woman who had given it order and peace. The rooms felt larger, colder, stripped of warmth he never properly acknowledged. When Nkiru walked out with her bags, she did not look back. Not because she hated him, but because looking back invites doubt, and she had chosen certainty. After she left, Kunal sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the remains of a life he thought was secure. The silence pressed against his chest. There was no one to argue with, no one to beg. The house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like evidence. And for the first time, Kunal understood that losing a home does not always involve eviction. Sometimes it happens when respect walks out carrying its own luggage. Days turned into weeks, and Kunal's world shrank quietly. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. Friends who once laughed with him suddenly had busy schedules. At work, the suspension stretched longer than expected. Explanations replaced by formal emails that offered no comfort. Kunal spent his days pacing, replaying moments he wished he could erase. Regret visited often, not as a teacher, but as a punishment, arriving late and staying long. He tried apologizing again, sending messages he hoped sounded sincere, but sincerity loses its strength when it arrives after exposure. Saada's absence lingered in a different way. Her name became a reference point in conversations she was not present for, a warning, a lesson, a cautionary example. Kunal felt the weight of shared guilt even without her presence. He realized that secrets bind people only while hidden. Once revealed, they separate everyone involved. His fear of reputation had come true, not dramatically, but steadily. He was not chased. He was not attacked. He was simply avoided. In Nigerian culture, avoidance is a powerful verdict. At night, Kunal lay awake listening to ordinary sounds, the hum of generators, distant laughter, the quiet movement of neighbors living their lives without him. He wished for noise, for confrontation, for anything that felt like engagement. But isolation does not argue. It settles. And as it settled, Kunal faced the truth he had tried to outrun. Consequences don't need an audience to work. They do their job faithfully in private. Nkiru's rebuilding did not look like celebration. It looked like calm mornings, steady routines, and the quiet return of self-respect. She stayed with family briefly, then found her own space, small, clean, peaceful. She resumed her life without announcement, refusing to let betrayal define her future. Women in her circle admired her strength, not because she endured pain, but because she refused to normalize it. She did not become bitter. She became clear. Clarity, she discovered, was healing. She focused on work, on friendships that mattered, on laughter that didn't require explanation. Sometimes humor slipped in naturally. Small jokes about starting afresh, about learning to trust instincts instead of excuses. She allowed herself to smile again without guilt. When people asked questions, she answered briefly and moved on. Her dignity did not depend on retelling her pain. It depended on living beyond it. Over time, Nkira noticed something surprising. Respect followed her. Not loud respect, not performative admiration, quiet, solid regard. People listened when she spoke. Women sought her advice, not because she claimed authority, but because she modeled boundaries. Nkiru realized she had not lost herself in the marriage. She had been waiting to choose herself. And that choice, once made, did not need applause. The story settled into the neighborhood's memory the way lessons do, softly but permanently. New tenants heard it in fragments. Old residents referenced it carefully. It was no longer gossip. It was a cautionary tale. People spoke of it when warning daughters about boundaries and reminding sons about accountability. Kunnal's name remained attached to the lesson, not with hatred, but with clarity. Actions, once public, do not dissolve easily. Kunnal continued living with the weight of what he had lost. Some things improved slowly, others never did. Trust did not return in full. Reputation healed only partially. He learned, late and painfully, that discretion is not wisdom, and secrecy is not safety. Saad rebuilt her life elsewhere, far from titles and attention, carrying a quieter understanding of humility. Neither of them ever fully escaped the consequences, but both were changed by them. Nkira moved forward without bitterness, her story complete without needing revision. The street remembered, not to mock, but to warn. And in that remembrance lived the final truth. Betrayal does not just break hearts, it educates communities. And once a community learns, it does not easily forget. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.